And now a little story from the Appleseed.
Thank you. This is my take on an old folk tale that comes out of the area known as the Brussels Bottoms of Texas. There once lived in a very peaceful part of the woods a great, big, fat raccoon. Now, raccoon always managed to find the easiest way to get something without having to work too hard, and most of the time without having to work at all. Now, he'd been lying out this particular day out in the sun, even had his oldest child fanning flies off his face while he slept. But his stomach had just given him a little wake-up call, and whenever Raccoon got that call, he answered. His stomach was yearning for what he loved best, and he loved nothing better than snacking on fat, juicy frogs. Green, bug-eyed, bumpy, fat, croaking, juicy frogs. He took them in all shapes and sizes. Now, there were plenty of other things in those woods that Raccoon could eat, but there was nothing easier than catching frogs. All you had to do was just kind of go down to the pond, sit there for a little bit, and after a while, up would pop some little beady eyes and little bumpy heads and little lumpy backs, and he would just ease down towards the water's edge and reach out and snatch up as many as he wanted and eat them and, take some home to his wife and kids, of course. Well, lately, there seemed to be something going on down at this pond because after a whole day's worth of sitting for several days in a row, there wasn't a frog to be seen. So he was feeling a little anxious as he started to lumber through the woods towards that pond. Now, the pond was full of life, and more to the point, it was full of frogs, and there they were out there, hopping, jumping, croaking, and, bullfrogging. But they had a meeting down below. They were sick and tired of this greedy frog-snatching raccoon coming up and snatching up their relatives and friends, and they planned on putting a stop to it. So they decided that from now on, anytime they saw him coming near their pond, they were going to stay down below the surface of the water, and he could starve to death for all they cared. Well, they had a few little frogs that were the sentries, and they were looking out, and they'd look from one to the other and go, "Is it coming? Keep it looking." Now, as the raccoon got closer to the pond, he could hear all this splashing, and that got the best of him. He started walking faster, and then he started running. Sure enough, one of those sentries looked out and said, "Oh, better get below." And just as the raccoon reached that pond, bam, down they all went. Raccoon said, "No, I know you're down there because I heard you as I was running down here. Now, hey, this is the cycle of life. Some get eaten, some do the eating. That's just the way it is. Now, it's a hot day. Maybe they're just down in the mud trying to cool off. I'm going to come back when the sun has started to go down when it's a little cooler." So he went back towards his home to wait for the sun to go down. He came back when it was a lot cooler, sat. Not a frog or an eye could be seen. So he decided to stay through the night, see if he could try his luck the next morning. But all through the night and early into the next day, that pond water stayed still. Well, by this time, the raccoon was so hungry and so frustrated that he just burst out crying. "Oh, man, come on. I gotta stop eating me, my baby." And off he went into the forest, filling it with his wails and his moans. Now, about the same time, Fox had just stepped out of his den to take his early morning stroll. Now, Fox was an easygoing fella, liked to take his time and reflect on things. Never bothered anyone. He was always in control. And as usual, he was impeccably dressed, even had his dog glasses on. Well, he hadn't gone very far before he heard coming from the opposite direction a loud wailing and a moaning. Fox flipped up his shades and caught sight of a pitiful but familiar form. Fox said, "Hey, my brother, you are distorting my solitude with all that noise. Now get yourself pull yourself together and tell me what is going on." Well, the raccoon tried to get himself together and explain to the fox, well, you can kind of consider me a fisherman. I like to fish, but, I fish for frogs, and I go down to the pond, I just sit there and I wait for a little bit to come up. I snatch them up, but lately I've been going down to the pond, man, and I ain't caught nothing. My wife is on my case, and I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Fox said, hey, here we go again with this food control thing. Now, I've been trying to help you out for a long time, my brother. I keep laying down this knowledge. You just ain't picking it up. And this is the same thing. You are thinking with your stomach instead of with your mind. Now, I'm going to go back with you to this pond. We're going to take care of this problem once and for all. And when we get there to the water's edge, I want you to just play possum. I want you to just stretch out on your back like you was dead, okay? And let me take care of the rest. Well, Fox went with Raccoon and got to the water's edge. Just as the fox said, Raccoon stretched out flat on his back like he was dead. He even coughed and sputtered to make it sound good. Fox looked out over that pond and said, hey, frogs, this is Fox. I think you accomplished what you set out to do. You've been trying to starve this brother to death. I think, by gosh, you did it. Now, the least you can do is come over here on this land and bury this brother, because after all, this is my walking path, and stepping over dead bodies just ain't my thing. Now, I don't know what it was like when you were young, but when we were in adolescent and teen years, you're in a group, you can think of things that nobody would ever think of individually. And we had our elders who'd be watching us. We call them old heads. And they would often try to save us from ourselves. But we got, one old head's trying to get in our business. Well, there just happened to be some old haired frogs watching all this. And one of them said, seen that, didn't do that. That's how I got to be old. Just 'cause you see it, ain't got to do it. Don't say you never been told. Old head frogs talking. He said he's dead. We're just going to go over there and check it out. Sure enough, frogs hopped out the water. One of them got a big stick, poked it at the raccoon. Raccoon didn't move. Poked him again. Raccoon didn't move. Frog said, yep, he's dead. And man, they started partying and bullfrogging right there on the bank. Fox said, hey. Let's cut out the partying and the bullfrogging here. Let's get the shovels and let's get this on. Once again, one of those old head frogs said, seen that, didn't do that. That's how I got to be old. Just 'cause you see it, ain't got to do it. Don't say you never been told. Fox said, no big deal. Frog said, we're just going to bury him. So they started to dig out the sand from under that raccoon. And when they had dug a little hole, the fox looked down and asked, or the frog looked up and said, is it deep enough? Fox looked down and said, well, can you jump out? Frogs took a leap. All of them leaped almost all the way back to the pond. He said, nope, not yet. They continued to dig out the sand as that raccoon sank down deeper into that hole. And they looked up and said, is it deep enough? Fox said, hey, can you jump out? Once again, that old head frog, seen that, didn't do that. That's how I got to be old. Just 'cause you see it, ain't got to do it. Don't say you never been told. Well, sure enough, they started to hop and jump and leap, but no matter what they did, they could not jump out of that hole. Fox looked down and said to the raccoon, it's all yours, my brother. And he had as many frogs as he wanted to eat that day. Now, that's normally the way that story ends. But given my experience with old heads, the elders who saved us from ourselves, I like to think those old head frogs came to the rescue, jumped down all the way to the bottom of that pond, began to swim perpendicular, began to dig out the mud until they had reached that hole that had been dug, water rushed in, and the rest of those frogs were able to get away. And years later, Some of those same frogs that had escaped that circumstance were now the old heads. They would watch those little young frogs and say, seen that, did that, almost didn't get to be old. Just 'cause you see it, ain't got to do it. Don't say you've never been told.
Thanks for joining us for a little story from the Appleseed.